In the quantum field of possibility, where consciousness meets the eternal dance of shadow and light, your story begins tonight. Beyond the boundaries of linear time, healing stories emerge from the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of human experience that Carl Jung knew held both our deepest wounds and our most profound capacity for wholeness. There exists a realm where understanding happens through embodied experience, where the psyche reveals its mysteries not through analysis alone, but through the living poetry of narrative. Tonight, as your conscious mind prepares to surrender to sleep, your deeper self opens to receive wisdom through the ancient art of storytelling. In this liminal space between waking and dreaming, we encounter a truth that Jung spent his lifetime exploring: the paradox of human attraction to what simultaneously wounds and awakens us. The pull toward love that hurts is not pathology. It is the soul's attempt to heal itself through repetition, seeking in each painful encounter the resolution that eluded us in our earliest formations of attachment. Through the portal of imagination, transformation becomes possible. Here, in the sacred theater of consciousness, we meet not just any character, but one whose journey mirrors the universal human struggle to understand why we are drawn like moths to flames that burn us, why we seek love in places where love cannot safely dwell, and how this very seeking, though painful, carries within it the seeds of our eventual liberation. The mystics knew what Jung rediscovered: that healing happens not through avoiding our deepest patterns, but through understanding them so completely that their grip upon us naturally loosens. Tonight, through story, you will witness this ancient alchemy of transformation. As the boundaries between your listening consciousness and the narrative realm dissolve, allow yourself to become both observer and participant in a journey that has been traveled by countless souls before you. For in the end, there is only one story being told here: the story of how love, even love that hurts, eventually teaches us how to love in ways that heal. In a city where glass towers reflect not just sky, but the hidden longings of millions of hearts, there lived a woman named Alara. She was 34, with eyes that held depths of understanding, and through years of searching for something she could never quite name, yet always seemed to recognize in its absence, Alara worked as a museum curator, spending her days among artifacts and artworks that spoke of human experience across centuries. She had developed an uncanny ability to sense the emotional residue left in objects by their creators, the longing in a sculptor's unfinished marble, the desperation in a painter's urgent brushstrokes, the hope embedded in a love letter from a war-torn century. This sensitivity, which served her professionally, made her personal life a labyrinth of intense connections that invariably led to familiar pain. She found herself drawn to partners who seemed to embody some indefinable quality of unreachability: brilliant minds housed in emotionally unavailable hearts, passionate souls wrapped in protective armor, creative spirits who could love their art but struggled to love her consistently. Her apartment, filled with beautiful objects from travels and exhibitions, told the story of someone who appreciated beauty yet somehow felt unworthy of receiving it fully. Books on psychology lined her shelves: Jung, naturally, but also attachment theory, trauma work, relationship dynamics. She read voraciously, understanding intellectually the patterns she found herself repeating, yet somehow unable to translate that understanding into different choices. Alara's history painted a picture that Jung would have recognized immediately: the daughter of a brilliant but emotionally distant father and a loving but anxious mother who had never quite learned to soothe herself, let alone her child. Her father, a renowned architect, had been present in body but absent in emotional availability, creating in young Alara both a profound appreciation for his creative genius and an equally profound hunger for his attention. This hunger had shaped itself into a specific form of attraction. She was magnetically drawn to partners who possessed her father's intellectual brilliance and emotional unavailability. unconsciously believing that if she could win the love of someone who mirrored him, she could somehow heal the original wound of not being seen and cherished for who she truly was. What made Ilara's situation particularly poignant was her awareness of the pattern. She could articulate it, analyze it, even help friends recognize similar dynamics in their own lives. Yet knowledge alone had not freed her from the compulsion to seek love in places where sustainable love could not grow. The setting of her life reflected this internal landscape. She lived between the museum's halls of historical beauty and her apartment's carefully curated loneliness. The city around her pulsed with millions of people seeking connection, yet she often felt more isolated in a crowded coffee shop than she did alone with ancient artifacts who, in their silent presence, seemed to understand her better than most. Living humans. This was where we found Ilara on the particular evening when her story of transformation would begin, standing before a newly acquired piece, a bronze sculpture of two figures reaching toward each other, their hands almost touching, but never quite meeting. The artist, according to the placard, had created it after a devastating divorce, and Ilara could feel in the metal itself the familiar ache of love that always seemed to exist in the space between having and holding. As she studied the sculpture in the museum's closing hour quietude, something shifted in her awareness. Perhaps it was the way the evening light struck the bronze, or perhaps it was simply time, that mysterious force that Jung knew could ripen consciousness toward readiness for change. Whatever the catalyst, Ilara found herself asking not the familiar question, why do I keep choosing people who can't fully love me? But a deeper, more compassionate inquiry. What is this pattern trying to teach me about love itself? The museum where Ilara worked stood as more than mere repository of human artifacts. It served as a bridge between worlds, a place where past and present conversed in silent dialogue. Built in the 1920s during the Art Deco movement, its architecture embodied the era's optimistic belief that beauty and function could merge to elevate human experience. Yet, like Ilara herself, the building held shadows alongside its light. The hall of ancient civilizations, where she spent most of her time, contained artifacts that spoke of humanity's eternal themes: love, loss, power, surrender, creation, destruction. Mesopotamian tablets inscribed with love poems that could have been written yesterday. Egyptian burial objects that revealed how thoroughly death and love intertwined in human consciousness. Greek sculptures that captured the tension between divine aspiration and human limitation. Working among these objects had given Ilara a unique perspective on human patterns. She could see how the same dynamics that played out in her modern relationships had been spinning their web through human hearts for millennia. The recognition was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it placed her struggles within the context of universal human experience. Unsettling because it suggested these patterns possessed a power that transcended individual willpower. The city beyond the museum's walls pulsed with its own rhythm of seeking and fleeing, connection and isolation. From her office window, Ilara could observe the dance of urban relationships. People meeting in coffee shops with the eager anticipation of new possibility. Couples arguing on street corners with the passion and intensity that suggested love complicated by unmet needs. Solitary figures walking with the particular quality of aloneness that comes not from lack of people, but from lack of true recognition. The museum's evening hours held special significance for Ilara. After the day's visitors departed and the building settled into contemplative quiet, she would often remain, finding in the silent presence of centuries-old objects a quality of companionship that eluded her in more conventional social settings. The artifacts asked nothing of her, yet seemed to offer everything witness to her thoughts, repository for her longings, mirror for her questions about what it meant to love and be loved. This particular evening, as autumn light filtered through the museum's tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to animate the static displays. Ilara felt the familiar pull of the bronze sculpture that had recently joined the collection. She had been the one to advocate for its acquisition, drawn by something in its emotional resonance that she couldn't initially articulate. The sculpture occupied a space in the contemporary expressions wing, positioned so that visitors would encounter it during the transition between ancient and modern galleries. This placement had been Ilara's suggestion. She felt the piece served as a bridge between humanity's eternal struggles and their contemporary manifestations. As she stood before it now, the bronze figures seemed almost alive in the shifting light. Their reaching hands created a space between them that felt charged with possibility and pain in equal measure. The artist had captured something profound about human longing, how it creates its own magnetic field, drawing us toward others while simultaneously maintaining the very distance that fuels the attraction. The museum's architecture supported this moment of recognition. The vaulted ceiling drew the eye upward, creating a sense of sacred space, while the carefully calibrated lighting system bathed the sculpture in warmth that seemed to emanate from within the bronze itself. The acoustic design of the hall meant that even whispered words carried clearly, yet absorbed quickly, creating an atmosphere of intimate contemplation. This environment, part sanctuary, part laboratory for understanding human nature, had shaped Ilara's approach to her own psychological patterns. She had learned to observe her attractions and relationships with the same careful attention she brought to cataloging artifacts. She could identify the provenance of her romantic choices, trace their stylistic elements back to childhood experiences, note their condition and authenticity. Yet, unlike the museum's objects, her living patterns resisted the kind of academic analysis that had served her so well professionally. Love, she had discovered, operated according to laws that transcended rational understanding. It moved through the psyche like weather through landscape, powerful, necessary, and largely beyond conscious control. The museum's evening atmosphere intensified these recognitions. As shadows deepened and silence settled, the boundary between observer and observed began to dissolve. The artifacts seemed less like objects and more like teachers, their presence suggesting truths that could only be absorbed, rather than analyzed. This was the world in which Ilara's transformation would unfold, a realm where ancient wisdom met contemporary struggle, where beauty and pain intertwined like lovers in an eternal dance, where the very act of witnessing human patterns across millennia created the possibility for those patterns to shift and evolve. The bronze sculpture before her held all of this. The reaching, the yearning, the space between connection and separation that had defined not just her own experience, but human experience across time. Tonight, in this sacred space between day and night, between conscious and unconscious, between past and future, something new was about to be born from the eternal dance of seeking love that heals rather than love that hurts. Like an archaeologist carefully brushing soil from ancient pottery, Ilara had learned to observe the intricate patterns that governed her choices in love. Each relationship revealed layers of conditioning that had been building since childhood, sedimentary deposits of experience that shaped her current emotional landscape. Her morning routine offered the first glimpse into these unconscious patterns. She would wake each day and immediately check her phone, not for news or social media, but to see if the current object of her affection had reached out during the night. This simple action contained multitudes: the hope that someone else's attention could validate her worth, the anxiety that lived in the space between reaching out and receiving response, the way she had learned to begin each day by looking outside herself for confirmation that she was worthy of love. The ritual continued as she prepared for work. Standing before her bathroom mirror, she would unconsciously adjust her appearance based on whether she might encounter someone who stirred her romantic interest. The choices seemed trivial: which earrings to wear, how to style her hair, whether to apply the lipstick that made her feel beautiful. Yet they revealed a deeper pattern of constantly editing herself to become what she imagined others might desire. At the museum, her professional competence masked a more complex dynamic. She excelled at her work partly because she genuinely loved it, but also because achievement felt like a currency she could exchange for admiration. When colleagues or visitors praised her knowledge or curatorial choices, she experienced a rush of validation that temporarily filled the persistent hollow feeling she carried. The pattern became most visible in her interactions with Dr. Marcus Reed, the museum's new director of research. Marcus embodied every quality that triggered her deepest attractions. Brilliant, articulate, internationally recognized in his field, and possessed of an emotional reserve that made his rare moments of warmth feel like sunlight breaking through clouds. During staff meetings, Alara found herself crafting comments designed not just to contribute meaningfully to discussions, but to capture Marcus's attention. When he did engage with her ideas, she felt a surge of aliveness that seemed to justify weeks of careful preparation. When he overlooked her contributions or seemed distracted, she would spend hours analyzing what she might have done differently. The dance extended beyond professional interactions. Alara began timing her arrival and departure to coincide with Marcus's schedule, creating opportunities for casual encounters in hallways or elevators. She would prepare witty observations about exhibitions or intellectual insights that might spark his interest, then feel deflated when conversations remained brief and professional. At home, the pattern manifested in different ways. She found herself curating her living space with Marcus in mind, choosing books to display that might impress him, selecting artwork that could serve as conversation starters, even stocking her refrigerator with the expensive wine she'd heard him mention enjoying. Her social life became organized around the possibility of encountering him. When the museum hosted evening events, she would spend hours preparing, selecting outfits that struck the perfect balance between professional and alluring. During these gatherings, she would position herself strategically, engaging in conversations that might naturally draw him into her orbit. The most telling pattern emerged in her response to his interactions with other women. When Marcus spoke enthusiastically with a visiting scholar or laughed warmly with a colleague, Alara experienced a cascade of reactions. Jealousy that felt like a physical pain in her chest, self-criticism for not being as engaging or accomplished, and a desperate strategizing about how to regain his attention. These responses revealed the deeper architecture of her attraction pattern. She was not simply drawn to unavailable men. She was drawn to the specific cocktail of hope and uncertainty that unavailable men provided. The intermittent reinforcement of occasional attention felt more valuable than consistent warmth, because it activated the same neural pathways that had been carved in childhood. When her father's rare approval felt like winning the lottery, the pattern had its own internal logic. By choosing partners who were emotionally elusive, Alara avoided the vulnerability that comes with being truly known and accepted. If someone couldn't fully see her, they couldn't fully reject her. The pain of chasing unavailable love felt safer than the risk of offering her authentic self to someone who might find it lacking. Her friendships reflected this dynamic as well. Her closest friend, Sarah, was wonderfully supportive, but also someone Alara could feel superior to. Sarah's relationship struggles were more obvious, her neediness more apparent. This allowed Alara to maintain the illusion that her own patterns were more sophisticated, more understandable, more justified. The pattern even influenced her relationship with herself. She had developed an internal critic that sounded remarkably like her father, brilliant, exacting, and never quite satisfied. This voice provided a familiar form of companionship, even though it caused constant suffering. The criticism felt like attention, and attention of any kind felt better than the alternative she feared most: being completely overlooked, utterly irrelevant, fundamentally forgettable. Evenings alone in her apartment revealed the pattern's ultimate function. Surrounded by beautiful objects and intellectual stimulation, she nonetheless felt an ache of incompleteness that no achievement or acquisition could fill. The busyness of pursuing unavailable love served as a distraction from this fundamental loneliness, giving her something to focus on besides the more terrifying question of who she was when she wasn't trying to earn someone else's love. The pattern had become so automatic that she rarely questioned it. Like breathing or walking, it operated below the threshold of conscious choice. She would find herself in familiar dynamics without remembering how she'd gotten there, surprised each time by the familiar combination of hope and disappointment. As if encountering Miss Pain for the first time rather than the phone's hundredth dot, the roots of Alara's pattern stretched back to a 7-year-old girl who had learned to read the emotional weather of her household with the sensitivity of a meteorologist. Her father, renowned architect Jonathan Hartwell, filled their home with his presence, even when physically absent. His projects scattered across dining room tables, his importance confirmed by late-night phone calls from clients around the world. His brilliance evidenced in the architectural magazines that featured his work. Young Alara had developed an exquisite attunement to his moods and availability. She learned that approaching him when he was deep in creative flow would result in distracted responses or gentle dismissal. She discovered that bringing him her school artwork when he was reviewing blueprints might earn a quick smile but rarely his full attention. Most significantly, she recognized that his moments of genuine presence, when his eyes would light up, that something she said or did felt like winning the lottery. Rare, precious, and impossible to predict or control. Her mother, Catherine, was loving but carried her own anxiety about Jonathan's emotional availability. Catherine had learned to organize family life around his work schedules and creative needs, creating a household atmosphere where everyone understood that his professional success was the family's priority. This wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Strategy in a world that rewarded his genius and paid their bills. The young Alara absorbed these dynamics like a sponge. She learned that love meant accommodating someone else's rhythm, that attention was scarce and must be earned through achievement or entertainment, that the most valuable people were also the most elusive. She developed what she would later recognize as hypervigilance, an exhausting but necessary skill for navigating relationships where emotional availability fluctuated unpredictably. The pattern crystallized during a particular incident. When she was 9 years old, her father had been working on a prestigious museum project, spending weeks absorbed in the design process. Alara had been saving a story she'd written about a magical architect who built bridges between worlds, waiting for the perfect moment to share it with him. That moment came on a Saturday afternoon when she found him in his study, pencils scattered around him, looking up from his drafting table with the slightly dazed expression he wore when emerging from deep creative focus. She approached carefully, reading his body language for signs of receptivity, then offered her story with the trembling hope that it might bridge the gap between his world and hers. He read it with genuine attention, his face lighting up as he recognized the way she'd incorporated elements from his own work into her fantastical narrative. For perhaps 15 minutes, she had his complete focus. He asked questions about her characters, praised her creativity, and even suggested she might become an architect herself someday. That 15 minutes became the template for everything she would later seek in love. The experience of being truly seen by someone whose attention felt valuable because it was rare. The dopamine hit of capturing his interest became her drug of choice, the standard against which all future connections would be measured. But like all intermittent reinforcement, the experience couldn't be replicated on demand. The next time, she brought him a story. He was stressed about a client deadline and barely glanced at it. The time after that, he was traveling. The pattern established itself. extraordinary moments of connection separated by long stretches of benign neglect, creating in her young nervous system an addiction to the high-stakes game of earning love from those who couldn't offer it consistently. The pattern served multiple protective functions. By learning to be satisfied with crumbs of attention, Alara avoided the vulnerability of asking for more than her father could give. By developing her own remarkable competence, excelling in school, becoming remarkably self-sufficient, she ensured she would never be completely dependent on someone else's emotional availability. Most importantly, the pattern gave her a sense of agency in situations where she actually had very little. If she could just be interesting enough, accomplished enough, understanding enough, she might finally unlock the consistent love that seemed always just out of reach. The pain of not receiving it could be explained by her own insufficiency, rather than by the more terrifying truth that some people, no matter how wonderful, simply cannot give what they don't possess. This coping mechanism had been brilliant. Adaptation for a child who needed to maintain connection with a beloved but emotionally limited parent. It had allowed her to preserve her love for her father while protecting herself from the full impact of his inability to meet her emotional needs. The strategy had worked so well that it became invisible to her. By the time she reached adulthood, seeking love from unavailable people felt like the most natural thing in the world. Available partners seemed boring, too easy, somehow less valuable than those who remained mysteriously out of reach. What she hadn't recognized was how this childhood adaptation had created a specific blind spot. She couldn't distinguish between love that challenged her to grow and love that simply repeated familiar dynamics of longing. Both involved some degree of difficulty, but one led toward expansion while the other led in circles. The pattern had also given her remarkable strengths. Her attunement to others' emotional states made her an exceptional friend and colleague. Her ability to find meaning in small gestures allowed her to appreciate subtleties that others might miss. Her resilience in the face of uncertainty had served her well in her professional life. But what had once been adaptive was now limiting her. The very sensitivity that had helped her navigate her childhood family system was now preventing her from recognizing and receiving the kind of consistent, available love that her adult self desperately needed. The origin story was not one of pathology, but of incredible resourcefulness. Young Alara had developed exactly the skills necessary to maintain connection within her family system. The question now facing her adult self was whether those same skills could evolve to serve her current needs, or whether new capabilities needed to be developed for different kinds of relationships. The collision between Ilara's established patterns and her growing awareness came on a Thursday evening in late October, as she stood before the bronze sculpture that had become her unwitting teacher. The museum had hosted a reception for major donors earlier that day, and she had spent hours in the familiar dance of trying to capture Marcus's attention while appearing naturally engaging rather than desperately strategic. The event had followed the predictable script. Moments of warm interaction with Marcus that sent her soaring, followed by his absorption in conversations with more senior colleagues that left her feeling invisible. She had performed her role perfectly intelligent, professionally accomplished, subtly alluring, yet had gone home feeling hollow in a way that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Now, alone with the bronze figures and their eternal reaching, something in her awareness shifted. Instead of her usual analysis of what she might have done differently to earn more of Marcus's attention, she found herself asking a different question. What if this isn't actually about him at all? The question arose not from her intellect, but from somewhere deeper, carrying with it a quality of recognition rather than discovery. It was as if she had always known this truth, but had been carefully avoiding it, the way one might avoid looking directly at a bright light standing before the sculpture. She could suddenly see the pattern from a different angle. The bronze figures weren't tragic because they couldn't quite touch. They were perfect exactly as they were. Their reaching creating a field of connection that didn't require physical contact to be complete. What if the space between reaching and having wasn't emptiness but fullness? What if longing itself was not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be understood? This shift in perspective created an uncomfortable recognition. If the pattern wasn't really about the other person's availability, then all her strategizing and self-improvement and careful positioning was missing the point entirely. The realization felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. The terror came from recognizing how much of her identity was organized around these pursuit dynamics. If she wasn't the woman who could win over brilliant but emotionally elusive men, who was she? If she wasn't constantly working to earn love, what would she do with all that energy? If the pain of unrequited longing wasn't the most valuable form of aliveness she knew, what would it feel like to simply exist without drama? But alongside the terror was something else. Curiosity. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely interested in discovering what lay beyond the familiar pattern. Not the desperate interest of someone trying to solve a problem, but the open curiosity of someone ready to explore unknown territory. The bronze figures seemed to mirror this state of curiosity. Their reaching contained no urgency, no desperation. They were suspended in a moment of pure intention, creating connection through the quality of their attention rather than through achieving any particular outcome. As she stood there, Elara became aware of how rarely she experienced this quality of present moment attention in her own life. She was almost always either replaying recent interactions for clues about others' feelings toward her, or planning future encounters designed to generate more favorable responses. The actual present moment, this moment with its own inherent fullness, was territory she rarely visited. The recognition came with physical sensations she hadn't expected. Her chest, which typically felt tight with anxiety or hope depending on her romantic circumstances, began to soften. Her breathing, usually shallow and quick, deepened naturally. Her mind, constantly spinning with analysis and strategy, became quiet in a way that felt both foreign and familiar, as if she were remembering something she had once known. This quietness allowed her to notice things that had been hidden beneath the noise of her usual mental activity. The museum's architecture, which she normally took for granted, revealed itself as remarkably beautiful. The evening light streaming through tall windows created patterns on the floor that shifted slowly, like a meditation in motion. The silence held depth rather than emptiness. Most surprisingly, she became aware of her own presence in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's attention or approval. Standing there alone, she felt substantial rather than incomplete, interesting rather than inadequate, worthy of care rather than constantly needing to earn it. The experience lasted only minutes, but its impact was profound. She had glimpsed a way of being that didn't require the familiar cycle of pursuit and disappointment. More than that, she had experienced herself as inherently valuable rather than conditionally worthy based on her ability to attract others. As the feeling began to fade and her familiar thought patterns started to reassert themselves, she made a decision that surprised her. Instead of trying to hold on to the experience or analyze how to recreate it, she simply acknowledged it with gratitude. Something had shifted, and while she couldn't yet see where this shift might lead, she was ready to find out. The bronze figures seemed to approve of this choice. Their eternal reaching no longer looked tragic to her. It looked like the most natural thing in the world. Connection arising not from need, but from the simple recognition of shared existence. Walking home through the city streets, Elara felt as if she were seeing familiar territory with new eyes. The couple she passed no longer triggered her usual analysis of their dynamics. The solitary figures no longer seemed lonely. The city itself appeared less like a maze of potential romantic encounters and more like a community of beings, each carrying their own internal richness. She didn't know yet how this shift would affect her relationship with Marcus or her patterns in love more generally. But for the first time in years, those questions felt less urgent than the deeper inquiry that was beginning to unfold. Who was she when she wasn't trying to earn anyone's love? And what became possible when she offered that self-authentic, complete, inherently valuable to the world? 3 days after her moment of recognition before the bronze sculpture, Ilara encountered the presence that would serve as catalyst for her transformation. It came in the most unexpected form. Dr. Helena Vasquez, a visiting scholar, specializing in the psychological dimensions of ancient artifacts. Helena had arrived at the museum to research pieces in their collection that depicted transformation, myths across cultures. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair that caught light like metal, and eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances into the emotional resonance of things. When she introduced herself to Ilara, her handshake conveyed both warmth and a quality of recognition that made Ilara feel immediately seen. "I understand you've been working with the new bronze piece in contemporary expressions," Helena said during their first meeting. "There's something about the space between the figures that fascinates me. What you see when you look at it." The question was simple, yet Ilara found herself pausing before answering. Most colleagues asked about historical context, artistic technique, or market value. Helena was asking about perception itself, about the inner experience of witnessing. "I see longing," Ilara replied carefully, then surprised herself by continuing. "But also completion, somehow, as if the reaching itself is the point, not whether they ever actually touch." Elena's face lit up with the particular pleasure of recognition between kindred spirits. Yes, exactly. Jung wrote extensively about this paradox, how the very things we think we need to grasp for completion are often the things that teach us we were already complete. Would you like to explore some of those ideas together while I'm here? This began a series of conversations that would reshape Ilara's understanding, not just of the artifacts in her care, but of the patterns that governed her own heart. Helena possessed the rare ability to weave together academic insight and lived wisdom, speaking about psychological concepts not as abstract theories, but as territories she had clearly traversed herself. During their second meeting, as they sat in Ilara's office surrounded by books and museum catalogs, Helena shared an observation that cut through years of Ilara's careful self-analysis. "I notice you speak about your relationship patterns with remarkable insight," Helena said, her voice carrying both curiosity and compassion. "You understand the psychology beautifully, yet there's something in your voice that suggests this understanding hasn't yet translated into different experiences. Would you say that's accurate?" The question landed like a key turning in a lock. Ilara hadn't realized existed. All her reading, all her therapy, all her careful analysis of her patterns, none of it had actually changed her lived experience. She was perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated person she knew, yet she continued to make the same choices that led to the same outcomes. "It's as if I know the dance steps perfectly," Ilara found herself saying, "but I keep dancing to the same song." Helena nodded with the recognition of someone who had encountered this paradox many times. Knowledge and transformation are different processes entirely. Knowledge happens in the mind. Transformation happens in the body, in the nervous system, in the parts of us that were shaped before we had words for what was happening. She gestured toward the bronze sculpture visible through the office window. "Those figures understand something that our minds often miss. They're not trying to figure out how to connect. They're already connected through the field of their mutual attention. The reaching isn't effort, it's expression." Over the following days, Helena began to reveal herself as more than an academic colleague. She had clearly done her own deep work around love and relationship, though she spoke of it only obliquely, through stories and metaphors that somehow conveyed more than direct explanation. I spent my 30s chasing brilliant but unavailable men, she mentioned casually one afternoon as they examined a Greek amphora depicting the myth of Psyche and Eros. Each one I was convinced would be different, yet somehow they all had the same essential quality. They could see my mind but not my heart. Alara felt a jolt of recognition. Helena was describing her exact pattern with remarkable precision. What changed? Alara asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the intensity of her curiosity. Helena smiled, running her fingers along the amphora's painted surface. I realized I was trying to heal my father wound through romantic relationships, which is like trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon. The hole in my heart had a specific shape. It was father-shaped, not lover-shaped. Once I understood that distinction, I could begin the actual work of healing. The conversation continued as they moved through the galleries, Helena sharing insights that felt like gifts carefully chosen for their relevance to Alara's specific struggles. Yet there was nothing preachy or prescriptive about her approach. She offered perspectives the way one might offer flowers freely, with no attachment to whether they were accepted. The thing about unavailable partners, Helena said as they paused before a Roman statue of Venus, is that they serve a function we're often unconscious of. They allow us to experience the intensity of longing without the vulnerability of being truly known. It's a form of emotional safety disguised as romantic passion. This insight hit Alara with the force of revelation. All her analysis had focused on what was wrong with her choices, but Helena was suggesting these choices served a protective function. She wasn't broken or pathological, she was unconsciously wise, creating relationships that felt intense without requiring the kind of authenticity that had felt dangerous in childhood. As their week of collaboration continued, Helena began to model a different way of being in relationship. She was warm without being intrusive, interested without being needy, present without demanding attention. Most remarkably, she seemed to possess an internal fullness that didn't require external validation to maintain. How do you do that? Alara asked one afternoon, startling them both with the directness of the question. Do what? Helena replied gently. Seems so complete. Like you don't need anything from anyone, but you still genuinely care about people. Helena was quiet for a long moment, and Alara wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. But when Helena spoke, her voice carried a quality of intimate honesty that suggested the question had touched something important. I learned to give myself the kind of attention I had been seeking from others, she said simply. Not as a substitute for connection, but as the foundation that makes authentic connection possible. When you're not constantly scanning others for signs of approval or rejection, you become available for something much more interesting, actually seeing who they are. That evening, as Alara walked home through the city streets, she found herself carrying Helena's words like a secret. The idea of giving herself the attention she had been seeking from others felt both revolutionary and terrifying. What would it mean to become the source of her own sense of worth? What would happen to the familiar intensity of romantic pursuit if she no longer needed it to feel alive? The questions felt different from her usual analytical inquiries. These weren't problems to be solved, but territories to be explored, doorways into ways of being she had never seriously considered. As she reached her apartment building, Alara realized something had shifted in her relationship to Marcus as well. For the first time in months, she hadn't spent the day strategizing about their next interaction or analyzing their most recent exchange. She had simply been present with Helena and the work they were doing together, absorbed in ideas that felt nourishing rather than depleting. The absence of her usual romantic preoccupation created space for something unexpected. Curiosity about who she might be when she wasn't organizing her identity around someone else's attention. It was a question that felt both frightening and full of possibility, like standing at the edge of undiscovered country. Helena's presence in the museum catalyzed a period of gentle experimentation for Alara. Unlike her previous attempts at changing her relationship patterns, which had involved rigid rules and forced behaviors, this felt more like playing with new possibilities, seeing what emerged when she approached familiar situations with fresh awareness. The first experiment began, almost accidentally. During a staff meeting where Marcus was presenting research on ancient Roman frescoes, Alara noticed her usual pattern activating. The careful positioning to catch his eye, the preparation of insightful comments designed to impress, the hyper-attention to his responses. But instead of automatically following these impulses, she found herself becoming curious about them. What would happen? She wondered if she simply listened to the presentation for its own merit, rather than as an opportunity to capture Marcus's attention. The question felt both simple and radical. As she settled back in her chair and actually focused on Marcus's words rather than his potential perception of her, something unexpected occurred. His research was genuinely fascinating. He was discussing how Roman artists had used visual metaphors to convey psychological states, embedding emotional narratives within decorative elements, for perhaps the first time since developing her attraction. To him, Alara found herself appreciating Marcus as a scholar and colleague rather than as a target for romantic pursuit. His passion for his work was evident. His insights were genuinely valuable, and his presentation style was engaging. When she asked a question at the end, it arose from authentic curiosity about his research rather than from strategic positioning. The difference in quality was immediately apparent. Her question sparked a brief but meaningful exchange about the intersection of psychology and art. Historical interpretation, exactly the kind of intellectual connection she had been seeking, but emerging naturally rather than through manipulation. Walking back to her office afterward, Alara felt energized in a way that was completely different from the adrenaline high of successful romantic strategizing. This energy felt sustainable, nourishing rather than depleting. She had connected with Marcus as a person, rather than as a projection of her unmet needs. The second experiment emerged during her lunch break. Rather than eating quickly at her desk while scrolling through social media and analyzing text exchanges with friends about romantic situations, she decided to take her sandwich to the museum's sculpture garden and eat in mindful silence. The garden, which she passed daily but rarely actually experienced, revealed itself as a sanctuary in the heart of the city. Late autumn sunlight filtered through bare branches, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted slowly across the ground. A small fountain provided gentle background sound that seemed to quiet her mind's usual chatter. As she sat on a bench eating her simple meal, Alara became aware of how rarely she gave herself this quality of peaceful attention. She was almost always either focused on others or focused on preparing to focus on others. The experience of simply being present with herself, without agenda or analysis, felt both foreign and deeply familiar, as if she were remembering something she had once known how to do. The third experiment was more challenging. That evening, instead of checking her phone obsessively for messages from potential romantic interests or analyzing social media for clues about others' lives, she decided to spend an hour reading for pure pleasure. She chose a book Helena had mentioned, a collection of essays by James Hillman about the soul's relationship to beauty. Reading without the background anxiety of monitoring her phone created a deeper level of absorption than she had experienced in months. Hillman's ideas about how beauty awakens something essential in human consciousness felt personally relevant in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself making notes, not because she might discuss them with someone impressive, but because the ideas themselves were nourishing her understanding. The most significant experiment began the following day when Helena invited Alara to join her for what she called artifact meditation, a practice she had developed of sitting quietly with ancient objects and allowing their emotional resonance to inform her understanding. Each piece carries the consciousness of its creators, Helena explained as they settled before a Mesopotamian cylinder seal dating back 4,000 years. When we approach them with receptive awareness rather than analytical minds, they can teach us about the eternal human experiences they were created to express. Sitting in comfortable silence beside Helena, Elara found herself dropping below her usual level of mental activity into something more spacious and receptive. The tiny cylinder seal, no larger than her thumb, began to reveal layers of meaning that went far beyond its historical context. The seal depicted a goddess figure surrounded by flowing water and growing plants, and as Elara allowed her awareness to rest with the image, she began to sense something of the consciousness that had created it. Someone 4 millennia ago had carved this symbol of feminine creative power with careful attention, embedding in the stone their understanding of how life force moved through the world. "What are you noticing?" Helena asked softly. The person who made this understood something about creativity as a form of spiritual practice. Elara replied, surprised by the certainty in her voice. They weren't just decorating an object. They were creating a talisman for remembering connection to life force itself. Helena nodded with evident pleasure. "And what does that understanding evoke in you?" The question opened something unexpected in Elara's awareness. She realized that her own creative capacities, her curatorial vision, her ability to help others connect with historical artifacts, her sensitivity to the emotional dimensions of art, were forms of spiritual practice she had never recognized. As such, I think I've been treating my work as a way to prove my worth rather than as an expression of something already valuable in me, she said slowly. This recognition extended beyond her professional life. She began to see how she had been approaching relationships the same way as opportunities to prove her lovability rather than as expressions of the love that already existed within her. The experiments continued over the following days, each one revealing new possibilities for relating to herself and others. When she attended a museum fundraising event, instead of scanning the room for romantic possibilities or positioning herself strategically, she found herself genuinely curious about the guests and their connections to art. The result was a series of wonderful conversations with people she might normally have overlooked. A retired teacher who had been visiting the museum weekly for 20 years. A young couple who had met in one of the museum's art history classes. An elderly man whose late wife had been a docent and who continued her tradition of monthly visits. Each conversation felt nourishing rather than depleting because she was offering attention freely rather than strategically. The evening felt successful, not because she had advanced any romantic agenda, but because she had connected authentically with fellow human beings who shared her appreciation for art and culture. Perhaps the most profound experiment occurred when Marcus approached her at the end of that same event to compliment her insights during a discussion about the museum's future expansion plans. "Your perspective on community engagement was really valuable," he said with obvious sincerity. "I hope we can collaborate more on developing those ideas." In the past, such attention from Marcus would have sent Elara into elaborate analysis of his words and tone, strategizing about how to build on this opening. Instead, she found herself simply receiving his appreciation and responding authentically. "I'd enjoy that collaboration," she replied, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with romantic pursuit. "The community dimension of museum work is what originally drew me to this field." As Marcus walked away, Elara realized something remarkable had occurred. She had received his attention and appreciation without needing to hold on to it, analyze it, or strategize about how to get more of it. The interaction had been complete in itself. satisfying without requiring any particular follow-up. Walking home that night, Alara felt as if she were discovering her own life for the first time. The city streets, the other pedestrians, even her own reflection in shop windows seemed more vivid, more real, more present than they had in years. The experiments were revealing something profound. When she stopped trying to earn love and attention from others, she became available for the love and attention that were already flowing all around her. The world was full of beauty, connection, and nourishment that she had been too busy strategizing to notice. The breakthrough came on Helena's final day at the museum, during what was meant to be a simple farewell conversation in Alara's office. Helena had completed her research and would be returning to her university the following morning, but she had asked for a few minutes to reflect on their week together. "There's something I want to share with you before I leave," Helena said, settling into the chair across from Alara's desk. "But first, I'm curious about your experience this week. How has it felt to experiment with different ways of being?" Alara found herself speaking with unexpected candor about the subtle but profound shifts she had noticed. The decreased anxiety around Marcus, the increased pleasure in her work, the sense of her own company being sufficient rather than something to escape through romantic pursuit. "It's as if I've been living in a house with all the curtains drawn," she said, "and this week I've been opening them one by one, discovering that there was light available all along." Helena smiled with evident delight. "That's a beautiful way to describe it. And what you're discovering is something." Jung spent his lifetime exploring the difference between seeking wholeness outside ourselves and recognizing the wholeness that's already present. She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious, which brings me to what I wanted to share. I've been watching you this week, and I see someone who has developed extraordinary capacities for understanding others, for creating beauty, for facilitating connection between people and art. These aren't skills you develop to earn. Love, they're expressions of love itself. The words landed in Alara's awareness like seeds finding fertile ground. She had always thought of her professional abilities as tools for proving her worth, but Helena was suggesting they were manifestations of something already valuable within her. "The pattern of seeking unavailable partners," Helena continued, "has been protecting you from recognizing your own fullness. As long as you're focused on earning someone else's love, you don't have to risk discovering whether you can love yourself." The observation cut through decades of careful self-analysis to touch something Alara had never been willing to examine directly. The familiar pain of romantic pursuit had indeed served as a distraction from a deeper, more terrifying question. What if she was inherently worthy of love, and the only thing preventing her from experiencing it was her own unwillingness to offer it to herself? "But here's what I've seen this week," Helena said gently. "When you stop performing for others' attention and start offering your authentic presence, something remarkable happens. You become magnetic in a completely different way, not because you're trying to capture anything, but because you're expressing something true." As if to demonstrate this point, Helena reached into her bag and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft cloth. "I want to give you something before I leave. It's not valuable in any commercial sense, but it carries a particular energy I think you'll appreciate." She unwrapped a small clay figure, no more than 3 inches tall, depicting a seated woman with her hands resting open in her lap. The figure was ancient, clearly from the same Mesopotamian period as many pieces in the museum's collection, but it emanated a quality of peaceful presence that was immediately apparent. "This is a votive figure from a temple dedicated to Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love and creativity," Helena explained. Pilgrims would leave these figures in the temple to hold their prayers while they were absent. But notice her posture. She's not reaching for anything. Her hands are open to receive, but they're also full just as they are. Alara accepted the figure with hands that trembled slightly. The clay was smooth and warm, and holding it created an immediate sense of connection to the consciousness that had shaped it thousands of years ago. The person who made this understood something about love that we've largely forgotten, Helena continued. They knew that love is not something to be captured or earned, but something to be expressed and shared. This figure isn't waiting for love to arrive. She's emanating love as her natural state. As Alara gazed at the ancient figure, something shifted fundamentally in her understanding. The clay woman's face held an expression of serene contentment that had nothing to do with external circumstances. Her posture suggested complete self-possession combined with openness to connection. This is what you look like when you're not trying to earn anyone's attention, Helena said softly. This is who you are beneath all the strategies and patterns and protective mechanisms. The recognition came not as thought but as felt experience. Sitting there, holding the ancient figure, Alara could sense the presence Helena was describing, a quality of being that was inherently valuable, naturally loving, authentically attractive, not because it tried to be, but because it simply was. Jung called this the individuated self, Helena explained. The version of us that exists when we're no longer organizing our identity around others' responses. It's not selfish or isolated, if anything. It's more capable of genuine intimacy because it's not desperate for validation. Tears began flowing down Alara's cheeks, though she couldn't have said whether they were tears of grief or relief. She was mourning the years spent seeking outside herself what had apparently been available within her all along. But she was also experiencing something like coming home, a recognition of her own essence that felt both revolutionary and utterly familiar. The beautiful thing about this recognition, Helena said, offering Alara a tissue while maintaining her gentle presence, is that it doesn't require you to become someone different. It only requires you to stop hiding who you already are. As the tears subsided, Alara found herself looking at Helena with new understanding. She could see now why Helena's presence had been so catalytic. She was living from this place of centered authenticity, expressing her natural qualities without apology or performance. How do I sustain this? Alara asked. How do I keep remembering this when I'm surrounded by all the old triggers and patterns? Helena smiled, gesturing toward the clay figure still resting in Alara's hands. The same way this figure has maintained her essential quality for 4,000 years. She doesn't try to be anything other than what she is. She doesn't resist the changes around her, but her core remains constant. The conversation continued for another hour, but something essential had already shifted. Alara could feel anew foundation settling into place beneath her familiar identity, a sense of inherent worth that didn't depend on external validation. As Helena prepared to leave, she offered one final insight that would stay with Alara long after their goodbye. You know, Jung said that we're never healed by avoiding our complexes, but by going through them so completely that they transform from prisons into teachers. Your pattern of seeking unavailable love has taught you extraordinary things about human psychology, about the nature of longing, about the difference between authentic and inauthentic connection. Now it's ready to evolve into something that serves rather than limits you. Walking Helena to the museum's entrance, Alara felt as if she were seeing the familiar building with completely new eyes. The space that had been the backdrop for so much romantic strategizing and professional performance now appeared as what it had always been, a sanctuary for human creativity, a bridge between past and present wisdom, a place where transformation was not only possible but inevitable. As Helena's taxi disappeared into the city traffic, Alara stood holding the ancient clay figure and realized that the woman she had been seeking to become through romantic conquest was the woman she had always been. The only thing that had changed was her willingness to recognize and express that truth. In the weeks following Helena's departure, Alara found herself moving through the world with a fundamentally different quality of presence. The ancient clay figure had taken up residence on her desk, serving as a daily reminder of the centered awareness Helena had helped her discover. But more than any external symbol, the shift lived in her body, in the way she carried herself through familiar spaces. With new understanding, the museum environment, once charged with romantic possibility and professional anxiety, became simply what it had always been, a place of beauty, learning, and human connection. Her morning arrival no longer involved scanning for Marcus's presence or preparing conversational gambits. Instead, she found herself naturally absorbed in the day's work, approaching each task with the kind of attention she had previously reserved for romantic strategizing. Her interactions with colleagues underwent a subtle but profound transformation. During staff meetings, she contributed ideas because they felt valuable to share, not because they might enhance her image. When discussing exhibition plans or educational programming, her suggestions arose from genuine care for the museum's mission rather than from positioning herself advantageously. The change was most apparent in her relationship with Marcus himself. The desperate edge of attraction had dissolved, replaced by something much more sustainable, professional respect mixed with warm collegiality. When they collaborated on projects, she found herself appreciating his expertise without needing to impress him with hers. When he offered praise for her work, she received it simply, without analyzing it for romantic undertones or strategizing about how to generate more. This shift created space for something unexpected to emerge, without the constant background noise of romantic pursuit. Elara discovered that she genuinely enjoyed Marcus's company as a colleague and friend. His passion for ancient Roman culture was infectious. His insights about museum pedagogy were valuable, and his dry sense of humor made staff meetings considerably more enjoyable. The most remarkable change was that Marcus seemed to be responding to her differently as well. Without the subtle pressure of her romantic interest, he appeared more relaxed in her presence, more willing to share casual observations or invite her input on challenging curatorial decisions. Their professional relationship deepened into something more collaborative and mutually respectful. One afternoon, as they worked together to design an exhibition on love and loss in ancient art, Marcus made an observation that crystallized the shift. "You know, Elara, working with you has become really enjoyable," he said, looking up from the layout sketches they were reviewing. "There's something different about your energy lately, more grounded, I think. It makes collaboration feel easier." Rather than analyzing his words for romantic potential, Elara simply felt grateful for the recognition. "Thank you," she replied. "I think I've been learning to bring more of my authentic self to work, which apparently makes everything more natural." The conversation continued without awkwardness or hidden agendas, focused entirely on creating the best possible exhibition for their visitors. Later, reflecting on the exchange, Elara realized that this was exactly the kind of professional respect and intellectual connection she had been seeking, and it just emerged naturally when she stopped trying to force it. Her social life underwent equally significant changes. Evening events at the museum, once arenas for romantic possibility, became opportunities for genuine engagement with art and community. She found herself having meaningful conversations with visitors, donors, and fellow staff members without constantly scanning the room for potential romantic interests. At her recent gallery opening, she spent a fascinating hour discussing contemporary sculptural techniques with an artist whose work was being featured. The conversation was intellectually stimulating and personally enriching, requiring none of the emotional energy she had previously devoted to romantic positioning. Walking home afterward, she felt nourished rather than depleted, successful in terms that had nothing to do with romantic conquest. Her apartment, too, began to reflect the internal changes. The careful curation designed to impress hypothetical romantic visitors gave way to choices made purely for her own pleasure and comfort. She rearranged furniture to create a reading corner that caught morning light perfectly. She displayed artwork that moved her personally, rather than pieces chosen for their conversational potential. Most significantly, she began inviting friends over without the ulterior motive of creating opportunities for them to introduce her to eligible partners. A recent dinner party with 3 close female friends had been purely for the pleasure of their company, and the evening had unfolded with a warmth and authenticity that felt genuinely nourishing. The change in her relationship with solitude was perhaps the most profound shift of all. Evening hours alone in her apartment, once filled with anxious energy about romantic possibilities or disappointments, became peaceful sanctuary time. She read books that interested her, listened to music that moved her, and sometimes simply sat quietly with tea, appreciating the quality of her own presence. This comfort with solitude created a paradox that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The more content she became with her own company, the more attractive she seemed to become to others. Invitations increased to social gatherings, professional events, collaborative projects. People seemed drawn to her energy without her making any effort to attract them. A colleague in the museum's education department had recently suggested they co-develop a workshop series on art as emotional language, recognizing Alara's intuitive understanding of how visual culture processed psychological themes. A local book club had invited her to facilitate discussions about novels that dealt with museum settings, appreciating her unique perspective on how cultural institutions functioned in contemporary life. These opportunities arose organically from her natural interests and abilities, rather than from networking strategies or professional positioning. The difference in quality was striking. Each collaboration felt genuinely exciting rather than calculated, rooted in authentic enthusiasm, rather than career advancement. Perhaps most surprisingly, romantic interest from others began appearing in her life without any effort on her part. A thoughtful man who frequented the museum's lecture series had begun lingering after talks to discuss the presentations with her. A friend of her friend had expressed interest in meeting her, having heard about her work and perspective. Even a barista at her local coffee shop had started conversations that seemed to contain gentle flirtation. What was remarkable about these developments was Ilara's response to them. Instead of the desperate analysis and strategic planning that had characterized her previous romantic encounters, she found herself approaching these possibilities with relaxed curiosity. If a conversation felt natural and enjoyable, she allowed it to continue. If someone's interest felt forced or incompatible with her authentic self, she gracefully declined without agonizing about the decision. The ancient clay figure on her desk seemed to approve of these changes, its serene expression serving as constant reminder that attractiveness arose not from effort, but from authenticity. The figure's posture, open but self-contained, receptive but complete, had become a kind of meditation on how to move through the world with both availability and integrity. Work itself became a form of spiritual practice rather than just professional obligation. Curating exhibitions, facilitating visitor connections with art, preserving cultural artifacts for future generations. These activities revealed themselves as expressions of service that fed her soul while contributing to community well-being. The recognition that her work was inherently meaningful, regardless of external validation, created a stable foundation for self-worth that no romantic relationship could threaten or enhance. This security allowed her to engage more fully with both professional opportunities and personal relationships, knowing that her essential value remained constant regardless of outcomes. The transformation of Alara's inner dialogue proved to be one of the most profound and sustainable changes in her new way of being. The harsh internal critic that had once sounded remarkably like her emotionally distant father gradually softened into something more compassionate and constructive, where She had once mentally cataloged her perceived failures in social situations, analyzing every conversational misstep, critiquing her appearance, strategizing different approaches for future encounters. She now found herself offering the same kindness internally that she would extend to a dear friend facing similar challenges. This shift began subtly during her morning routines. Instead of immediately checking her phone for external validation or scanning her appearance for flaws, she started each day with a few moments of gentle self-acknowledgement. Standing before her bathroom mirror, she would take a breath and consciously appreciate something about herself. Perhaps the way her eyes held kindness, or how her hands were skilled at caring for fragile artifacts, or simply the fact that she was showing up for another day of life. The practice felt artificial at first, like speaking a foreign language, but gradually it became more natural. The voice that emerged was neither artificially positive nor relentlessly critical, but something more honest and sustainable. A perspective that could acknowledge both struggles and strengths with equal clarity. This internal shift affected every aspect of her emotional experience. When she made mistakes at work, ordering the wrong materials for an exhibition, missing a detail in a catalog entry, fumbling during a presentation, her inner response changed dramatically. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism and catastrophic thinking about her professional competence, she found herself responding with the kind of practical compassion she might offer a colleague. Okay, that wasn't ideal, she would think, but everyone makes errors sometimes. What can I learn from this, and how can I address it constructively? This approach not only felt better emotionally, but actually led to better outcomes as her energy went towards solving problems rather than berating herself for having them. The transformation was particularly apparent in her processing of interpersonal interactions. When a conversation with Marcus or another colleague didn't unfold as smoothly as she might have hoped, instead of spending hours analyzing what she had done wrong, she learned to simply acknowledge that social interactions were complex and imperfect by nature. More importantly, she developed the capacity to appreciate successful connections without immediately strategizing about how to replicate or build upon them. When a meaningful conversation occurred naturally, she could simply feel grateful for the experience without needing to turn it into evidence of her worthiness or a platform for future hopes. This internal shift had profound effects on her emotional regulation abilities. The anxiety that had once accompanied most social situations, the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the constant monitoring of others' responses gradually gave way to something more spacious and grounded. She developed what she came to think of as emotional weather awareness, the ability to notice feelings as they arose without being overwhelmed by them or immediately needing to change them. Disappointment, when it came, was acknowledged as disappointment rather than evidence of personal failure. Joy, when it emerged, was experienced fully rather than immediately analyzed for its sustainability. This capacity extended to her interactions with challenging emotions that had previously sent her into elaborate defensive strategies. Loneliness, which had once triggered desperate romantic pursuit, became simply loneliness, a natural human experience that could be met with self-compassion rather than frantic activity. The process of setting healthy boundaries became much more natural as her internal foundation solidified. Where she had once said yes to social commitments out of fear of missing romantic opportunities or appearing antisocial, she learned to make choices based on genuine interest and available energy. When friends invited her to events that felt draining or inauthentic to her current way of being, she found herself able to decline gracefully without elaborate justifications or guilty feelings. Conversely, when opportunities arose that felt nourishing and aligned with her authentic interests, she could say yes wholeheartedly rather than calculating how they might serve some romantic agenda. Perhaps most significantly, she developed the ability to be authentically vulnerable in relationships. without the desperate neediness that had characterized her previous romantic pursuits. She could share genuine feelings, admit uncertainties, and ask for support when needed, all from a place of strength rather than from the hollow hunger for external validation. This showed up in her friendships first, where the stakes felt lower. She began having more honest conversations with close friends about her experiences and struggles, discovering that authenticity created deeper connection rather than driving people away. Her friend Sarah, in particular, remarked on how much more present and genuine Alara seemed in their interactions. "It's like you're actually here now," Sarah said during one of their regular coffee dates. "Before, even when we were talking, I could sense part of you was always somewhere else, planning or analyzing something. Now you feel completely available to the conversation." The observation was accurate. Alara had indeed become much more present in her relationships because she was no longer using them as stepping stones toward romantic objectives or opportunities to practice social strategies. Each interaction could be complete in itself, valued for its own inherent richness rather than for what it might lead to. The development of genuine self-compassion proved to be the foundation for all other changes. As she learned to treat herself with the same patience and kindness she naturally extended to others, her entire approach to life became less harsh and more sustainable. This self-compassion wasn't the false positivity of affirmations that didn't ring true, but rather the practical kindness of acknowledging that being human was inherently challenging and that she, like everyone else, was doing her best within complex circumstances. When romantic feelings toward unavailable people arose, as they occasionally still did, she could acknowledge them without judgment, while also recognizing that these feelings were information about her psychological patterns rather than directives for action. The emotions could be experienced and observed without automatically triggering the elaborate pursuit behaviors that had characterized her past. The ancient clay figure on her desk had become a kind of external anchor for this internal transformation. Its serene self-possession served as a daily reminder that contentment was an inside job. That attractiveness arose from authenticity rather than performance, and that love, including self-love, was best expressed through presence rather than pursuit. As winter settled over the city and her first year of living from this new awareness approached completion, Alara found herself reflecting on how profoundly her entire life experience had shifted. The changes weren't dramatic in external terms. She still lived in the same apartment, worked at the same museum, moved through the same daily routines. But the quality of her experience had transformed completely. Where she had once lived in a state of chronic dissatisfaction and romantic hunger, she now experienced what could only be described as contentment. Not the passive contentment of someone who had given up on life's possibilities, but the active contentment of someone who had discovered that she was already complete while remaining open to whatever connections and experiences life might offer. The changes in Alara's way of being created ripples that extended far beyond her own experience, touching every relationship and interaction in ways both subtle and profound. Like dropping a stone into still water, her transformation created expanding circles of influence that reached people and situations she never could have anticipated. The first and most immediate ripple effect appeared in her relationship with her parents. During her monthly phone calls with her mother, Catherine, the quality of their connection shifted dramatically. Where Alara had previously used these conversations to seek advice about romantic situations or to perform a successful professional life, she now found herself simply enjoying her mother's company. This change allowed her to see Catherine more clearly as a person rather than as a source of validation or anxiety. She discovered that her mother possessed wisdom about life and relationships that had been hidden beneath years of Alara's unconscious positioning. Catherine, in turn, seemed to relax into a more authentic version of herself, sharing observations and experiences that revealed depths Alara had never recognized. Most remarkably, Catherine began speaking more openly about her own marriage to Elara's father, acknowledging some of the emotional challenges she had navigated, while also expressing genuine love and appreciation for the life they had built together. These conversations helped Elara understand her parents' relationship with greater complexity and compassion, seeing it as a real partnership between imperfect humans rather than as the source of her own psychological limitations. The ripple effect extended to her relationship with her father as well, though more gradually. During their infrequent but meaningful conversations, Elara found herself less desperate for his approval, and therefore more able to appreciate the ways he did show care and interest. Jonathan, perhaps sensing this shift, began asking more questions about her work and sharing more of his own creative process. In one particularly meaningful exchange, he expressed admiration for her ability to help others connect with art and culture, noting how different but equally valuable her gifts were from his own architectural talents. The conversation felt like the kind of recognition she had been seeking throughout childhood. Yet now that it had arrived, it felt like a bonus rather than a necessity. Her colleagues at the museum became the next circle to experience the ripple effects. The education department's workshop series that Elara had co-developed with her colleague proved remarkably successful, attracting participants who were hungry for the kind of authentic connection between psychology and art that she was uniquely positioned to facilitate. During these workshops, Elara found herself naturally embodying the integrated approach that Helena had modeled, weaving together academic knowledge with personal insight, creating space for participants to discover their own connections to the material rather than imposing interpretations upon them. The feedback was consistently positive, but more importantly, Elara could see that the workshops were creating genuine transformation for participants. People left with new ways of seeing both art and themselves, carrying insights that extended far beyond the museum walls into their daily lives and relationships. Marcus, too, was affected by the changes in Elara's energy and approach. Their professional collaboration deepened into something genuinely collegial and mutually supportive. As Elara's desperate edge of attraction dissolved, Marcus seemed to feel safer being himself around her, sharing creative ideas and professional challenges with increasing openness. Their joint exhibition on love and loss in ancient art became one of the museum's most successful shows, both critically and in terms of visitor engagement. The combination of Marcus's scholarly expertise and Elara's intuitive understanding of emotional resonance created something neither could have achieved alone. More than professional success, their working relationship demonstrated how much more satisfying collaboration could be when it arose from mutual respect rather than hidden agendas. Other staff members began seeking out partnerships with both of them, recognizing the quality of creative synergy they had developed. The ripple effects extended into Elara's broader social world as well. Friends began seeking her perspective on their own relationship challenges, drawn by her combination of psychological insight and hard-won wisdom. Rather than feeling burdened by these requests, Elara found herself genuinely helpful in ways that felt nourishing rather than depleting. She could offer support and perspective without feeling responsible for others' choices or outcomes. Her advice came from authentic care rather than from the need to position herself as wise or valuable. This created more honest and useful exchanges that actually helped people rather than simply making Elara feel important. Perhaps most significantly, the men who entered her social orbit began responding to her transformed energy in ways that revealed how different authenticity felt from performance. The thoughtful museum visitor who had been engaging her in post-lecture conversations gradually revealed himself as someone genuinely interested in getting to know her rather than in conquest or casual attention. Their interactions unfolded with a natural pace that felt sustainable rather than artificially accelerated by romantic anxiety. When he eventually invited her for coffee, the invitation felt like a natural extension of their existing connection rather than a strategic romantic escalation. What struck Alara most about this developing friendship was how little effort it required. Conversations flowed naturally. Silences felt comfortable rather than charged with unspoken expectations. And each interaction left her feeling more energized rather than depleted by analysis and strategizing. The museum itself seemed to respond to the collective changes in staff energy and approach. Visitor engagement increased, donor relationships deepened, and collaborative projects with other cultural institutions multiplied. The institution was becoming known not just for its collections, but for its capacity to facilitate meaningful connections between people and art. Alara's role in this institutional flourishing was significant but not ego-driven. She had become someone who helped others connect with their own authentic interests and responses, rather than someone who needed to be the center of attention or the source of all insights. The most unexpected ripple effect appeared in the form of a letter that arrived 6 months after Helena's departure. It was from a young woman who had attended one of Alara's workshops and found it transformative in addressing her own patterns of seeking validation through romantic relationships. Your workshop helped me understand that I was trying to heal old wounds through new relationships, the woman wrote. But more than the insights, it was something about your presence that showed me what it looked like to be complete within yourself while still being open to connection. I've been practicing that approach in my own life, and it's changed everything. Reading this letter, Alara realized that her transformation had become a gift not just to herself but to others, who were ready to receive a different model of how to move through the world. She was inadvertently mentoring others simply by being authentic, creating permission for them to explore their own wholeness. The ripple effects continued expanding in ways she could never fully track or measure. Students in her workshops went home to their families with new insights about communication and relationship. Colleagues carried her collaborative approach into their own projects. Friends applied her modeling of self-compassion to their own. Life challenges dot what had begun as one woman's journey toward healing her. Attraction to unavailable love had become a catalyst for broader transformation in her entire community. The recognition filled Alara with gratitude and a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with the mysterious way that individual healing creates collective healing. As spring arrived and Alara completed nearly a year of living from her transformed awareness, she encountered the deeper work that Jung had always insisted was necessary for genuine individuation, the integration of shadow aspects that her previous patterns had been designed to avoid. The shadow work began unexpectedly during a moment of apparent success. The museum had received a prestigious grant partly based on the innovative programming that Alara had helped develop, and she was being recognized for her contributions at a staff celebration. As colleagues offered congratulations and praised her vision, she became aware of a familiar sensation arising, the old hunger for external validation, beginning to stir. Instead of pushing the feeling away or judging herself for experiencing it, Alara found herself becoming curious about this shadow aspect of her personality. What if the part of her that craved recognition wasn't pathological, but rather a natural human capacity that had become distorted through childhood conditioning? That evening, sitting quietly in her apartment with the ancient clay figure nearby, she allowed herself to explore the full range of her personality without judgment. Yes, she was genuinely humble and service-oriented, but she was also ambitious, competitive, and desirous of recognition. Both aspects were true, and denying either one created internal fragmentation. The insight proved liberating. Instead of trying to be purely selfless, which had always felt forced and unsustainable, she could acknowledge her natural desire for acknowledgement while ensuring it didn't drive her choices unconsciously. The shadow aspect, when brought into awareness, became a source of energy rather than a source of shame. This integration extended to other previously rejected aspects of herself. She had always prided herself on being understanding and compassionate, but she discovered that she also possessed capacity for healthy anger, clear boundaries, and discriminating judgment. These qualities, when integrated consciously, enhanced rather than contradicted her genuine kindness. The process revealed how her pattern of seeking unavailable love had served a shadow function as well. By choosing partners who couldn't fully see or accept her, she had avoided the vulnerability of being truly known, including being known in her less flattering aspects. The pursuit of unavailable love had been a sophisticated form of hiding as much as it had been a form of seeking. The most challenging shadow work involved acknowledging her capacity for manipulation and control. She had always thought of herself as spontaneous and authentic in relationships, but honest self-examination revealed how much strategic thinking had influenced her choices. Even her recent changes, she realized, could become subtle forms of performance if she wasn't careful. This recognition didn't negate her progress, but rather completed it. By acknowledging her human capacity for manipulation while choosing not to act from it, she developed genuine rather than reactive authenticity. The integration created internal coherence that was far more stable than the previous split between good and bad aspects of herself. The ancient clay figure seemed particularly relevant to this phase of work. Its serene expression contained something Alara was only now beginning to recognize, not the absence of complexity, but the integration of complexity into wholeness. The figure's piece came not from being perfect, but from being complete, containing all aspects of human experience within unified awareness. As she learned to embrace her shadow aspects with the same compassion she extended to her acknowledged strengths, Alara discovered that her capacity for authentic relationship expanded dramatically. She could now show up in connections with her full humanity rather than edited versions designed to maintain others' approval. This integration work affected her romantic possibilities as well. The thoughtful man from the museum lectures, whose friendship had been developing gradually over months, began to feel like someone she could actually know and be known by. Their conversations deepened to include not just shared interests, but acknowledgement of struggles, mistakes, and areas of ongoing growth. The relationship that emerged felt fundamentally different from her previous romantic experiences. Instead of the intoxicating intensity of pursuing someone unavailable, this connection offered the quieter but more sustainable satisfaction of mutual recognition between complete human beings. The deepest transformation in Alara's journey involved what Jung would have recognized as the emergence of the self, that archetypal core of personality that transcends ego consciousness and connects individual identity to universal patterns of meaning. This emergence didn't announce itself dramatically, but rather grew like dawn gradually, naturally, until she realized that the landscape of her entire life had been illuminated by a different quality of light. The shift became apparent through her relationship to her work at the museum. What had once been primarily a career, something she did to support herself and gain recognition, revealed itself as a calling that connected her individual talents to something much larger than personal success. Facilitating connections between people and art wasn't just her job. It was her particular way of participating in the eternal human project of creating meaning through beauty. Each exhibition she curated, each workshop she facilitated, each conversation she had with visitors became an opportunity to serve something sacred. The human need to find significance and connection through creative expression. This recognition transformed the quality of her daily experience. Simple tasks like writing exhibition labels or arranging display cases became forms of meditation, ways of honoring both the artists who had created the works and the contemporary people who would encounter them. She was participating in a chain of transmission that stretched across cultures and centuries. The ancient clay figure on her desk took on new meaning during this phase of development. She began to understand it not just as a symbol of self-possession, but as a representation of the eternal feminine principle that Jung had called the anima, the soul quality that connects individual consciousness to the collective unconscious. The figure's posture of receptive openness represented something Alara was learning to embody, the capacity to be a vessel for wisdom and creativity that originated beyond personal ego. Her best work happened when she got out of her own way and allowed larger intelligence to flow through her individual talents and training. This soul alignment extended beyond professional life into her relationship with existence itself. She began experiencing what mystics throughout history had described, a sense of belonging to something infinite while remaining grounded in particular personal circumstances. Walking through the city streets, she would sometimes feel overwhelmed by awareness of the millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, each person carrying their own struggles and triumphs, their own journey toward wholeness. Rather than feeling insignificant in the face of such vastness, she felt intimately connected to the universal human experience. Her romantic life, too, became an expression of soul alignment rather than ego need. The developing relationship with David, the thoughtful museum visitor whose friendship had gradually deepened, felt like collaboration and mutual awakening, rather than an attempt to fill psychological holes through external means. Their connection had qualities she had never experienced before: ease without boredom, depth without drama, passion that enhanced rather than destabilized her sense of self. They could support each other's individual growth while creating something together that neither could achieve alone. Most remarkably, she no longer felt the familiar anxiety about whether the relationship would last or develop according to particular timelines. The connection was valuable in itself, complete in each moment, rather than being dependent on future outcomes for its worth. This shift in consciousness affected every aspect of her life. Friendships became opportunities for mutual encouragement, rather than sources of comparison or validation. Family relationships transformed from sites of old wounds into contexts for practicing forgiveness and acceptance. Even difficult interactions with challenging people became chances to embody the compassion and wisdom she was developing. The museum itself seemed to respond to this shift in consciousness among its staff. Visitors frequently commented on the quality of their experience there, noting how the institution felt more like a sanctuary than a typical cultural venue. The space was becoming what it was meant to be, a bridge between human creativity and transcendent meaning. As Alara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, she could see how necessary each phase had been. The years of seeking love in unavailable places had taught her about the nature of longing itself. The painful recognition of her patterns had created readiness for change. The experimental phase had shown her different possibilities. The integration work had created internal coherence. Now, aligned with her soul's deeper purposes, she could see how even the most difficult experiences had been serving her eventual wholeness. The pattern of seeking unavailable love had been her psyche's way of protecting her until she was ready for the vulnerability of authentic intimacy, both with others and with life itself. In the quietude of late evening hours, as autumn returned to mark the completion of Alara's first full cycle of transformed living, she experienced what Jung would have recognized as the emergence of the transcendent function, that mysterious capacity of consciousness to bridge seemingly opposite qualities into unified understanding. Sitting in her apartment with the ancient clay figure nearby, Alara could feel the presence of something larger than her individual identity. It wasn't a loss of personality, but rather expansion of it, as if her personal consciousness had become a window through which universal consciousness could perceive itself. The feeling was subtle but unmistakable, a sense of being held by something vast and benevolent, of belonging to a wisdom tradition that stretched across cultures and millennia. She was still completely herself, still Alara with her particular history and characteristics, but she was also participating in something eternal, the human journey toward wholeness. This transcendent awareness revealed the deeper purpose behind her years of romantic struggle. She could now see how her attraction to unavailable love had been her soul's way of keeping her searching until she was ready to discover what she was actually seeking. Not completion through another person, but recognition of her own inherent completeness. The pattern had been perfect teacher for her particular temperament and circumstances. Someone else might have needed different lessons, different catalysts for growth. But for her, the paradox of seeking love where it couldn't be found had eventually led to finding love where it had always been available within her own capacity for authentic presence. This understanding brought profound forgiveness for all the years of what she had previously considered wasted time. There had been no wrong turns, no mistakes, no pathology, only the necessary unfolding of consciousness toward its own recognition. The transcendent perspective also revealed the interconnectedness of all her relationships. Her parents, despite their limitations, had given her exactly the experiences she needed to develop her particular strengths and insights. Marcus had served as the perfect unavailable object to help her recognize the futility of seeking external validation. Helena had appeared precisely when she was ready to receive different guidance. Even her attraction to unavailable partners could now be seen as expressing a transcendent truth, the human soul's yearning for union with something infinite. The romantic pursuit had been a misdirected but authentic spiritual longing, seeking in finite relationships what could only be found through connection to the infinite source of love itself. This recognition didn't diminish the value of human relationship, but rather placed it in proper context. Her developing connection with David felt precious, not because it completed her, but because it allowed two already complete beings to share their wholeness with each other. The museum work, too, revealed its transcendent dimensions. Each artifact in the collection represented someone's attempt to express the ineffable through material form. Her role as curator was to facilitate others' recognition of the sacred that artists throughout history had been trying to capture and communicate. The bronze sculpture that had catalyzed her initial recognition now appeared as what it had always been, a perfect representation of the transcendent paradox of human relationship. The figures eternal reaching toward each other expressed the simultaneous truth of individual autonomy and universal connection. As winter settled once again over the city, Alara found herself living from a quality of presence that felt both completely natural and utterly mysterious. She was still engaged with ordinary life-work responsibilities, relationship navigation, daily challenges, but everything was held within awareness of something larger. The ancient clay figure on her desk had become more than symbol or reminder. It was a companion in consciousness, representing the eternal feminine wisdom that connects all seeking souls to their own inherent wholeness. Its serene expression reflected back to her the peace that comes not from having everything figured out, but from trusting the intelligence that guides all growth toward light. Late at night, as the city quieted around her and the museum's ancient artifacts rested in their carefully controlled environment, Alara would sometimes feel the presence of all the seekers who had come before her, artists and lovers, mystics, and ordinary people, all finding their own ways to the same recognition that love is not something to be captured, but something to be expressed, not something to be earned, but something to be embodied, not something to be found outside oneself, but something to be discovered as the very ground of one's own being. As our story finds its natural resting place, we see Alara, 2 years after her transformation began, standing once again before the bronze sculpture that had served as catalyst for her journey. But now she approaches it not as someone seeking answers, but as someone who has learned to embody the very wisdom the figures represent. The museum around her has evolved too, becoming known throughout the city as a place where art facilitates genuine transformation. Visitors often remark on the quality of presence they encounter there, as if the space itself holds the understanding that beauty is meant to awaken rather than simply to be admired. Ilara's relationship with David has deepened into something neither had thought possible, a partnership that enhances rather than completes each partner's individual wholeness. Their love feels spacious rather than possessive, nourishing rather than depleting, rooted in appreciation for who each person actually is rather than projections of who they might become. Most remarkably, her relationship with her own solitude has transformed completely. Time alone no longer feels like waiting for life to begin, but rather like communing with the fullness that is always present. She has discovered that the most available love is the love that arises naturally from a heart at peace with itself. The ancient clay figure still graces her desk, but now it serves less as reminder and more as companion, a representation of the timeless wisdom that connects all humans who have learned to find in their own presence the love they once sought in others' attention. Her work has expanded beyond traditional curation into what could only be called soul tending, helping others discover in art the same recognition of inherent wholeness that had transformed her own life. Each workshop, each exhibition, each conversation with visitors becomes an opportunity to transmit what cannot be taught, but can be awakened. The pattern that had once seemed like her greatest limitation, the attraction to unavailable love, now reveals itself as having been her most skillful teacher. It had kept her searching until she was ready to discover what she was actually seeking, guided her through exactly the experiences necessary for her particular journey toward wholeness. Looking at the bronze figures now, Ilara sees them not as representing the pain of longing, but as celebrating the joy of connection that transcends physical contact. Their reaching expresses the eternal truth that love is not something to possess, but something to embody, not something to capture, but something to express, not something limited by availability, but something that flows freely when it arises from fullness rather than need. The story completes itself in the recognition that healing happens not through avoiding our deepest patterns, but through understanding them so completely that they transform from limitations into gateways to wisdom. As Ilara's story settles into the timeless realm where all healing narratives reside, notice how her journey mirrors something eternal and universal, the path that every consciousness travels from seeking wholeness outside itself to recognizing the wholeness that was always present within. Her transformation becomes your transformation. Her recognition becomes your recognition. Her peace becomes your peace. The wisdom she discovered is not unique to her story, but belongs to the collective treasury of human understanding, available to anyone ready to receive it. Feel how her learned capacity for self-compassion resonates in your own heart. How her release from the need for external validation creates space for your own inherent worth to be recognized. A journey from seeking love in places where it cannot fully exist to offering love from the place where it eternally exists becomes a template encoded in your consciousness, available for activation when your own readiness aligns with possibility. The bronze figures in her story represent the eternal truth about all human connection. That love is not diminished by physical separation, that hearts can touch across any distance, that the deepest intimacy happens in the recognition of shared being rather than in possession or capture. Allow your consciousness to absorb this understanding at the cellular level, where transformation happens below the threshold of mental analysis. Your nervous system is receiving new information about how to exist in relationship, both with others and with yourself, from a place of fullness rather than need. The ancient clay figure's serene presence becomes a quality you can embody. Open to connection but complete in solitude, receptive to love but not dependent on it for identity. Available for relationship, but not defined by its presence or absence. As you prepare to release conscious control and allow sleep to continue the integration work, feel your entire being settling into the recognition that you are already whole, already worthy of love, already complete, and that from this foundation, all authentic relationship becomes possible. Now, like the museum's artifacts settling into protected quietude as evening light fades, allow your conscious mind to rest, knowing that the deeper wisdom of Alara's story continues to work within you as you sleep. Feel your body surrendering to the horizontal realm of dreams, where the boundaries between individual stories and universal truth dissolve completely. Your breathing naturally slows and deepens, like the gentle rhythm of waves touching shore, carrying away the day's concerns and bringing in the night's healing wisdom. The bronze figures in their eternal reaching become a lullaby for your nervous system, their peaceful tension between connection and autonomy translating into perfect relaxation between effort and surrender. You need not reach for anything now. Sleep comes to you as naturally as love flows to the heart that knows its own fullness. The ancient clay figure's serene expression becomes your own expression as consciousness releases its grip on analysis and strategy, allowing the deeper intelligence of rest to restore and renew every cell in your body. Trust that the healing work continues, even as awareness fades into the restorative darkness of sleep. Like Alara finding peace in her own company, you can rest completely in the sanctuary of your own being, knowing that morning will bring not just renewed energy, but deeper integration of the wisdom your unconscious mind is processing through the night hours. The city around you sleeps, millions of hearts beating in rhythm with the eternal dance of seeking and finding, losing and discovering, reaching and resting. You belong to this vast community of beings, all learning in their own time and way what Alara learned. That love is not something to chase, but something to embody. Not something to earn, but something to express from the infinite source that lives within every heart. Sleep now, complete and peaceful, carried by the current of healing that flows through all authentic stories, held by the love that needs nothing but gives everything, resting in the wholeness that was never actually lost, but only temporarily forgotten. As consciousness drifts between waking awareness and the healing realm of sleep, allow your mind to absorb the deeper psychological truths that Alara's story illuminates. Jung understood that our most painful patterns often serve as gateways to our greatest wisdom, and the attraction to unavailable love carries within it profound teachings about the nature of human connection itself. This pattern emerges not from pathology, but from intelligence, the psyche's sophisticated attempt to heal old wounds while protecting against new ones. When we seek love from those who cannot fully offer it, we create a paradoxical safety. We experience the intensity of romantic connection without the vulnerability of being truly seen. It allows us to feel the aliveness of pursuit without risking the exposure that comes with authentic intimacy. The unavailable partner becomes a perfect screen onto which we project our deepest longings, while maintaining unconscious control over the outcome. We choose people who mirror our early attachment figures, often brilliant, accomplished, but emotionally elusive because our nervous system recognizes the familiar territory. The pain feels like coming home because it activates the same neural pathways carved in childhood, when love and longing were inextricably intertwined. But Jung discovered something remarkable about these repetitive patterns. They continue until they teach us what we need to learn. The cycle of pursuit and disappointment, intensity and withdrawal. Hope and heartbreak serves a sacred function. It keeps U.S. searching until we discover that what we seek cannot be found in another person, but must be cultivated within ourselves. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited about the healing journey. Our brains are designed to form attachments, and early experiences literally shape the neural pathways that govern how we approach connection throughout our lives. When childhood attachment includes inconsistent availability, we develop what researchers call an anxious attachment style, a heightened sensitivity to relationship threats, combined with intense longing for closeness. This creates a specific neurochemical addiction. The brain begins to associate the stress hormones of uncertainty with the reward chemicals of love. The intermittent reinforcement of occasional attention from an unavailable partner triggers the same neural reward system that makes gambling addictive. We become hooked not on love itself, but on the biochemical cocktail of hope and fear that unavailable relationships provide. Understanding this neurological dimension brings compassion to the pattern rather than shame. Your nervous system learned to survive in specific conditions, developing strategies that were absolutely appropriate for your early environment. The challenge is that these same strategies, while brilliant adaptations for childhood, may limit your capacity for the consistent, available love that your adult self needs to thrive. The beautiful discovery that Elara made, and that your own consciousness is absorbing, is that these neural pathways can be rewired through new experiences. When we practice receiving love from available sources, starting with our own self-compassion, we literally rebuild the brain's capacity to recognize and accept. Sustainable connection. Beyond psychology and neuroscience lies an even deeper truth that mystics throughout history have recognized. Human romantic longing is often misdirected spiritual yearning. The intensity we feel toward unavailable partners may be our soul's attempt to experience union with something infinite, seeking in human relationships what can only be found through connection to the sacred dimension of existence. This spiritual perspective doesn't diminish the importance of human love, but places it in proper context. When we recognize that our deepest longing is for connection to the source of all love, human relationships become expressions of that connection rather than attempts to create it. We can love others from fullness rather than need, appreciation rather than desperation, celebration rather than attempt to fill an inner void. The ancient clay figure in Elara's story represents this spiritual understanding, the recognition that we are already connected to everything we seek, already complete in our essential nature, already worthy of the love we imagine we must earn through achievement or attraction. Jung also understood that individual healing serves larger purposes, addressing not just personal wounds, but ancestral patterns that have been passed down through generations. Elara's transformation represents healing that extends backward through her lineage and forward into her potential future family. Her father's emotional unavailability likely reflected patterns he inherited from his own upbringing, ways of relating that may have stretched back through generations of people doing their best within the limitations of their historical moment. By healing her own attachment wounds, Elara breaks generational cycles of emotional unavailability, creating new possibilities for how love can be expressed in her family line. This understanding brings profound meaning to individual healing work. When you transform your own patterns of seeking love that hurts, you're not just improving your personal relationships, you're participating in the healing of collective human patterns that have created suffering across cultures and centuries. One of the most profound aspects of Elara's transformation involves learning to navigate the paradox between surrender and choice in relationships. She discovered that healthy love requires both complete acceptance of what is and clear intention about what serves her well-being. This paradox appears throughout spiritual traditions. We must simultaneously accept people exactly as they are, while choosing relationships that actually nourish our growth. We can love someone completely while recognizing that a romantic relationship with them may not be wise or sustainable. Ilara learned to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Marcus was a wonderful person whose emotional availability didn't match her relationship needs. She could appreciate his gifts without needing to pursue romantic connection with him. She could feel attracted to unavailable people without acting on that attraction. She could acknowledge her patterns with compassion while choosing different behaviors. This paradoxical wisdom becomes encoded in your consciousness as you sleep, creating new possibilities for how you navigate the complex terrain of human attraction and choice. The deepest healing happens not through mental understanding alone, but through embodied experience. Ilara's transformation included learning to recognize the physical sensations that accompanied different relationship dynamics, the tight chest and shallow breathing of romantic anxiety, the relaxed shoulders and deep breathing of authentic connection. Your nervous system is learning from her story how different it feels to love from fullness rather than need, how sustainability feels different from intensity, how authentic attraction differs from compulsive pursuit. These somatic lessons integrate below the level of conscious awareness, creating new felt sense experiences that will guide future choices. As you rest, your body processes these new possibilities, allowing your nervous system to experientially understand what secure attachment feels like. The relaxation you're experiencing now becomes a template for how peaceful love can feel when it arises from self-compassion rather than self-abandonment. When individuals heal their patterns of seeking unavailable love, the effects extend far beyond personal relationships into the broader fabric of community and culture. Ilara's transformation influenced her workplace, her friendships, her family relationships, and even strangers who encountered her workshop offerings. This ripple effect happens because authentic love is inherently generative. It creates more love rather than consuming it. When we learn to love ourselves with genuine compassion, we become sources of that same compassion for others. When we embody the integration of strength and vulnerability that characterizes secure attachment, we give others permission to explore their own wholeness. Your own healing journey contributes to this larger transformation in ways you may never fully know. The person you become when you no longer need to chase unavailable love becomes a gift to everyone whose life intersects with yours. As you enter the realm of dreams, trust that the healing work continues in dimensions beyond conscious awareness. Dreams often provide the perfect laboratory for experimenting with new ways of being without the constraints of waking identity. Tonight, your unconscious mind may offer dreams that allow you to experience secure attachment, practice new relationship skills, or integrate the wisdom from Ilara's story into your own life narrative. These dream experiences become part of your emotional memory, expanding your repertoire of possible responses to romantic situations. The dream realm also provides access to archetypal energies that support transformation. The wise inner teacher, who knows your deepest truth. The protective inner parent, who can offer the unconditional love you may have missed in childhood. The integrated lover who embodies both passion and stability. Jung recognized that psychological development follows a spiral pattern rather than a linear progression. We return again and again to similar themes and challenges, but each time from a higher level of awareness and integration. Ilara's story represents one complete spiral of this eternal return from unconscious pattern through conscious recognition to integrated wisdom. Your own journey may require multiple spirals, each one bringing deeper understanding and more stable transformation. This is not failure, but the natural rhythm of psychological growth. Each time you recognize and heal an aspect of your attraction to unavailable love, you create foundation for the next level of healing to emerge. The ancient clay figure's eternal serenity represents this cyclical wisdom, the understanding that growth happens in seasons, that healing unfolds according to its own timeline. that each return to familiar challenges offers opportunities for greater mastery and deeper compassion. As sleep deepens and conscious awareness fades, rest in the knowledge that you are exactly where you need to be in your own spiral of awakening, supported by forces both personal and transpersonal, held by love that is infinitely patient with the pace of human transformation. The story continues in your dreams, in your waking choices, in the gradual alchemy of becoming who you have always been beneath the patterns that once seemed to define you. Trust the process, surrender to the healing, and allow the infinite love that created you to guide you home to yourself.